Fantastic, thank you. So I am going to start by sharing my screen a second. So let's hope the technology works. Can you see that, Tam? Does that work again?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, fab. So hi, good evening, everybody. So my name is Michelle. I hope you guys are well this evening. So I'm here today from Hartford Wealth. And really the idea is that we can talk about financial well-being. So it would be really helpful if you could have a pen and paper or maybe your phone to make notes on a couple of sections. We do have a workbook, but for whatever reason, Zoom isn't letting us share it in the chat. So we can share it with you afterwards if you'd like it. So I'll give you a little bit of background about me. So I'm a former chartered accountant. I qualified back in 2009. And now I am a director and founder of Hartford Wealth. So we help people plan their financial pathways, things like pensions and investments and that sort of thing. I'm also an accredited financial education specialist. So what that means really is I've done some extra training that means that I can deliver workshops in schools, so from primary through to sixth form, and also I can deliver workshops like we're doing today. So for groups like this or for employees in the workplace sometimes as well. Okay, so the workshop that we're going to cover this evening is designed to try and give you an overview of how your finances can be affected by changes in lifestyle, changes in income over a period of time. So hopefully the plan is that it makes everything just that little bit less daunting. Financial well-being is becoming more and more recognised as an important part of our mental well-being. So a lot of research has been carried out that shows that worries about our money and our finances cause us stress and anxiety. Now, we all knew that all along, right? But the research is there now to back it up. So 74% of people in the last year, of Brits in the last year, have been so stressed about money that they felt overwhelmed and unable to cope. So if this is you, please don't feel alone with that. There is a large proportion of the population that are also struggling. And then I also think it's interesting that if you see the stat there, 38% of people aren't comfortable talking about their money struggles either. So we have this worrying combination where people are stressed to the point of overwhelm, and yet they also then don't feel comfortable to talk about it. So really what I'm hoping to do today is try and break some of those barriers, talk about money in an open way, and make you aware of some of the tools that are available to help you with that too. So I think it would be good just to stop for a second and have a little think about your current financial position, your financial journey, your journey to this point. So maybe you're a new parent, maybe you've been a parent for many years. Are you working at the moment? What changes might you have had to your career recently? I know lots of people with COVID have had career changes. Have you got a property? Are you trying to plan your retirement? These are all sort of situations that tie into our finances. So we could just take 90 seconds, not long, but just have a think about what are your current financial concerns and what are your current financial worries. Just have a think about that. Okay. I didn't time that, so I don't know whether that is quite 90 seconds, but hopefully that's just given you a little second just to think, what am I thinking about when it comes to my finances? So try and keep that in the forefront of your mind if you can. So it's not letting me swap my slides. There we go. So I'd like you to meet Sophie, Callum, and Sam. So these are our three personas. We call them Safe Sophie, Carefree Callum, and Savvy Sam. So we're going to talk about these different profiles and see if you can relate to any of these individuals or their patterns.
Seven patients in immediate.
Okay, so this is Sophie. She's generally quite risk averse. She does plan for the future, but she does it in quite a risk averse way. So her savings are mostly in cash. And though she's really good at putting her money away, it isn't necessarily increasing in value at the moment because the interest rates are so low at the bank. So in terms of her focus, short term, her focus is to try and save as much as she can. And she's quite good at budgeting to help that. Medium term, depending on what life stage Safe Sophie is at, she'll be looking at trying to get on or get up the property ladder and trying to progress her career as well. And then longer term, Sophie will be planning for her retirement, and she'd like to be able to retire and be able to support her family too. Okay, so that's Sophie. Let me just have a look. We've got a chat question there. Oh, thanks. Sorry, Tam, that's you sharing things. Fab. Okay, so then we have Carefree Callum. So he's the complete opposite of Sophie. He's just been traveling. He doesn't really have any savings to buffer additional costs or those sorts of things. He rents his own house. He can only really just afford to pay his rent. He doesn't have any investments, and he doesn't contribute into his workplace pension. So Callum is the sort of persona where he has short-term goals, which is around funding his lifestyle and traveling, but he doesn't really have any medium or long-term goals. And then we have Savvy Sam. So he is quite considered when it comes to his finances. He budgets, he has an interest in the property market. In terms of his goals, so he's looking again at trying to get up the property ladder as soon as possible. And he's looking at trying to diversify his investments and pay his mortgage off as soon as possible, those sorts of things. Okay. So having met those three personas, can you ever think about these for you? So we've spoken about the short, medium and long-term goals of Sam, Sophie and Callum. What would you say your short, medium and long-term goals are? If people ever think about that. And also, of the personas, are you recognizing any of those characters as well? Thanks for popping I've just got a couple of the email addresses coming through, so I'll make sure that we send that workbook to you afterwards, so don't worry about that. So what are your short, medium and long-term goals? Okay. So first of all, let's have a look at our actual pay slips and understanding what deductions are coming off those, because these are simple things that actually often lots of people don't understand how they work. So we've got income tax and national insurance that are deductions from our pay. And as most people will be aware, that goes towards funding the government's public spending. So this is deducted on a pay-as-you-earn basis over the tax year rather than over the calendar year. So that means it's calculated from the 6th of April to the 5th of April the following year. So these are the existing tax bands. Confusingly, they set the income tax bands annually and the national insurance bands weekly. To give you a bit of an idea, £183 a week is £9,500 a year. So that sort of gives you an idea. £962 is just over 50,000 of those thresholds. Okay. And then we've got student loan deductions. So interestingly, the average student loan is £40,000, but it's expected that only 30% of people repay their student loans in full, which is quite shocking, I think. Now, student loans are only repaid once you earn over a certain threshold. So depending on whether you've got a postgraduate or an undergraduate loan, you'll pay that back at a different rate. So those two calculations are done separately, and then they're added together for your total deduction. So if you've got both, it can be quite a sting in terms of your monthly income. Okay. Now, each employer then pays a contribution into auto enrolment, into your pension through auto enrolment. you can choose to increase the amount that is being put in by giving up, or we say sacrificing, part of your salary. And what that then effectively means is that you choose to reduce your salary, and the equivalent amount is then put into a pension through a contribution on your payslip. Now, this is a really, really tax efficient way of putting money aside for later life. And it also then means that you pay less national insurance that way as well. So this is the sort of thing from a persona perspective that Savvy Sam would be doing. Okay. Now, in the workbooks that I am going to send to you, there is actually sort of a template to allow you to work through your current payslip and just check that all your deductions are correct. I would really recommend that you do that, because surprisingly, often mistakes are made on these things with tax codes and things. So it is worth just taking a few minutes and double checking that you are getting paid what you should be and that the deductions are all being done correctly. Okay. Right. So let's have a little look at budgeting and spending then. So there's lots of considerations and influence when it comes to spending on money, but these are four of the main ones, I would say. Rising living costs is stuff that we're all very aware of that at the moment. It's a current issue. It will also be a future issue. And it's something that we'll have a look at a little bit later as well. Now, social media has become a huge influence on how people spend their money. We all know that moment where you've seen the friend that's just gone off on that holiday that you think that you'd really like to go, and it does influence how we are spending our money for sure. Made worse by the fact that a lot of celebrities and influencers are actually paid to show us them doing things for the sole purpose of us wanting to do it as well. So it's definitely an influence on how we are spending our money these days. Fast payment means that often we pay for things without really actually thinking about them. So, with Apple Pay, you don't even have to get your credit card out anymore, do you? Or if you're online, you don't even have to put in the long card number. So it is meaning that we are maybe taking less time to consider the purchases that we are making. And accessibility has the same impact. So we're desiring things that we want maybe rather than the things that we need. So it's a classic moment when you're in Tesco's and you're about to pay, but you're walking past the batteries, the cereal bars, the sweets that your children want. They're there because they're there to try and make them extra accessible, not because they're necessarily things that you need. And, the companies are very, very savvy with this now, which is not always a helpful thing for us when it comes to our pockets. So there's four main considerations really that relate to how much you should be looking to save. So I asked earlier about looking for short, medium and long-term goals. So obviously these are really personal things, but if you think about what you've put for your goals for a minute, do you know whether you will have enough funds for your short-term goals, for example? And do you have a savings plan in place for your medium and long-term goals? Because often it's our medium and long-term goals that actually are, they can be quite expensive things, and starting earlier and having a plan in place can be the difference between whether or not we can actually achieve those goals. So it's good to just take the time to look at that. Secondly, we all know from the events of the last 18 months that you can never predict what's going to happen. You can never predict what's going to happen in the future. But it can be simple things. So your car breaks down and you've got high repair costs. Or perhaps you have another child and the costs of looking after that child increase. These are things that it's important that we are aware of so that we can then plan for them and budget for them accordingly. And then there's two national trends that we need to be aware of really. So this is the increased longevity, so we're living longer, and the cost of living is rising. So if we have a look at that a little bit more, amazingly, it's estimated that 1 in 3 babies born today will live to be 100. And actually, they think in 20 years' time, the number of centenarians, I think that's how you say it, people over 100, will increase by over 600%. So looking at the graph on the right here, the figures have been adjusted to remove inflation. But what we can see is that the disposable income of people who are working age is lower than pensioners after housing costs. So what this means is that rising living costs are really hitting millennials hard, and this is why we talk about the renting generation. People are finding it much harder to get onto the property ladder because they've got higher living costs. And so we're living longer and the cost of living is rising. So it's a difficult combination for us, isn't it? So if we are looking to save our money, where should we be saving it? So this is effectively the tiering order that we talk about with clients for savings. So obviously you need a little bit of cash in your pocket for, I don't know, Friday night takeaway or a parking meter, but really this is generally quite a small amount. Then you've got your current account. So this is where you get your wages paid into, where your bills are going out from, etc. So this is what we'd say, these are your day-to-day accounts, and for fixed expenditures. After that, perhaps you consider a savings account. So maybe with your current bank or somewhere else whereby you've got cash that's there as savings and earning more interest than you would from your general current account, but it's readily accessible, which is really important because often when we try and look to get good savings rates, we can end up locking our money away. Whereas really we need that part of savings that we can access easily. And then we've got one of the most tax efficient savings vehicles, and that is an individual savings account or an ISA. So let's have a look at what we can do with that. So there's lots and lots of different types of ISAs. Annually, you can put £20,000 into an ISA, and that can be held in either cash or in stocks and shares. Now, what most people aren't aware of is that you can have a stocks and shares ISA that doesn't have any stocks or shares, which sounds bananas, but I think a lot of people, they see this stocks and shares and they think that they must hold shares in Amazon or in specific companies. But actually what you can choose to do is invest in funds instead. So you could invest in commercial property or corporate bonds. All of that can be done in a stocks and shares ISA. So if you are a little bit more risk averse, there are still options for you to make use of a stocks and shares ISA. And we will talk about property specific ISAs later as well. Okay. So we've gone through how to save and where. What about looking at how you could increase your savings each month? So I thought it'd be good to have a look at some budgeting tips that can help this. So a really good way is just to start by deciding what it is that you're saving for. So we talked earlier about having short, medium and long-term goals. Actually, if we have these in mind, it can be much easier to budget, because we know the cost of what we're saving towards, but also it's much easier to save towards something that's real to us. So versus just putting it into a savings pot, if you're saving for a holiday or you're saving for a certain retirement income level, for example, if it's real to you, it makes it much easier to then save towards that goal. Secondly, be honest when it comes to assessing your spending. So one of the things we find often when we talk to people about their monthly expenses, and they'll write down what they think their expenses are, if you then compare that to what their actual expenses are in terms of what actually leaves their bank account, it can be very, very different. So yes, jot down what you think your expenses are, but always make sure you compare it to what's actually going out of your bank account. And it's always better to overestimate what those costs could be rather than to underestimate them. Thirdly, most people budget monthly. Most of our bills are monthly bills. But what that means is that we sometimes miss out annual costs. So for example, we're approaching Christmas now. That's an expense that comes around every year. But actually, if we aren't building that into our budget, then this can mean that sort of that Christmas time can be quite difficult financially. So make sure when you are setting a budget that you are also looking at things annually, or things like car insurance, for example. Often it can be cheaper if we can do it annually, but we can only do that if we've built towards that part and budgeted for it. And then finally, just make sure, sorry, not finally, fourth, make sure that you work out a budget and keep updating it. So our expenses, our income, it changes all the time. So make sure you keep an up-to-date budget. And then finally work out what would you like to save each month. And if you are looking to try and save, the best thing is to almost try and treat that savings as a bill. So that money comes out at the beginning of the month rather than sitting in your current account. And that doesn't mean that savings pot can't then be touched. Of course it can. We all know that needs to happen sometimes. But it means that you have to go through that thought process of accessing the savings rather than it just being sat in your current account where it's much easier to spend it. Okay. Has anyone got any questions at that point? I haven't checked the chat for my mouse isn't working here.
Yeah, if anyone's got any questions at any point, like feel free to drop them in, any comments, anything kind of that either you're finding really interesting or you haven't thought of. I think it's really, really interesting. Like I said, it's one of those things that we don't talk about enough. So it's really nice to kind of hear it. And yeah,
it's also one of those things like everybody has sort of, it's quite a private thing, money, isn't it? So people aren't always comfortable talking. So I will just keep going. If anyone has got any questions that I'm going through, then please do just shout out and interrupt me. I won't take it personally. So I thought it would be good to have a look at an example of how this could actually work in real life in terms of making small changes. So if we look at Carefree Callum, he gets a vanilla spice latte on his way to work each morning and it costs him £3.25. Now, let's say Callum stops and says, do you know what, I'd like to get on the property ladder. I'd like to build up a house deposit. Well, if Callum could cut that vanilla spice latte each day, then he could actually be saving himself £845 a year. So over a period of 8 years, Callum could actually have saved £6,760. So that's a 5% deposit for a house of 135k. So what I'm trying to show is that that's a relatively small change, but actually by making that small change, because he's doing it for a reason, actually that can then change whether or not Callum can achieve some different long-term goals, which if he hadn't stopped and thought about it, he might not have been able to do. Okay, oops. So just a couple of points to consider. I know a couple of these consider points reference the workbook, which I can send out to you guys to use afterwards. Okay, so let's have a look at general borrowing and getting on the property ladder, because I know this is a key consideration for a lot of people. I think also really key to point out is borrowing can be seen as a really negative thing. But in actual fact, almost everyone will borrow at some point in their lives, whether that's for a mortgage, getting a credit card. It's not something that we should be intimidated by, but it is important to understand how those loans and those borrowings work, because if you're not careful, things can spiral. So it's just key to make sure that you understand when you are taking out debt, that you understand exactly what it is that you're taking on. Okay. So we're all very aware that property prices are rising at the moment. I've never seen so many happy estate agents. Houses are coming on and disappearing very quickly, and the costs are going up and up, aren't they? And what this means, it's obviously a lot harder for people to get on the property ladder these days. So there's a couple of stats here just to give a bit of perspective on it. So the average age of a first-time buyer is 31 outside London. I think the key barrier to most people is the average deposit required. So the average deposit is £33,000. That's a lot of money, isn't it? So lifetime ISAs are a really great tax efficient way to help you get onto the property ladder. So you can use a lifetime ISA to either buy your first home or to save for later in life. So In terms of the rules, to take one out, you have to be over 18 and under 40. You can put in up to £4,000 each year until you turn 50, and the government add what they call a 25% bonus onto that each year. So for every £4,000 that you put in, the government will top that up to £5,000. So to give you context on that, with the example of Callum earlier and his spiced latte, his £6,760, had he put it in a lifetime ISA, would actually be worth £8,450. And that's before he's earned any interest on that money as well. So it does really make a big difference. Just bear with me a second, because I've not plugged my Mac in properly and it's telling me that my battery's going to die. So apologies, 1 second. Okay, there you go. You think we'd be used to these things by now, wouldn't you? My apologies. Okay. So when you do come to looking to get a mortgage and a property, don't forget that there are quite a lot of schemes out there to help people with that first step. So there's a few of them mentioned here. The equity loan scheme, or the help to buy scheme as it's known, can be really good for first-time buyers, but also for existing homeowners that are looking to take a step up the ladder. So you can borrow basically up to 20% of your house value from the government for free for 5 years. So that's something that my husband and I did when we bought our current house. He's a financial advisor, so anything that's 0% interest always makes him take note. There's also the guarantor scheme. So effectively, by asking a family member to be a guarantor, it allows you to be eligible to borrow more and often to get better rates on your mortgage as well. And then I think the other one, just the shared ownership scheme as well, which is really good for people who are struggling again to buy, often because maybe they've got a low deposit. And this allows you to buy generally 25% up to 75% of a property, and then you pay rent on the rest of it that's below market rate. So generally this is either available to people who are first-time buyers. I think there's an 80k cap on your income as well if you were to look to use that option. But the key benefit is a smaller deposit for it as well. So just a couple of key points to take from that. I'm just going to have a sip as well. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the things to think about when it comes to our medium and long-term goals. So your money can work much more effectively for you if you don't need it in the short term. So time is life's most precious commodity, isn't it? But there is a way that we can use it wisely and effectively when it comes to our finances. So when you invest your money, we say you realize the effect of compounding. So this is effectively the ability of an asset to generate its own earnings that you then reinvest. So to put it simply, you're earning interest on interest. Compounding is the magic of investing. Albert Einstein famously said it was the 8th wonder of the world. So to try and illustrate that, I thought I would put a little example in. So what would you rather have for the next 30 days, a penny that doubles in size every day, or getting £50,000 every day? So I don't know whether people have got access to the chat, but which do you think you would prefer, a penny that doubles every day or getting £50,000 every day for the next 30 days? Oh, instantly two people with opposite thoughts. It's hard to know, isn't it? Shall we have a look at how it actually works through? Oh, another one come in, it keeps disappearing. Okay, so after 10 days, the little penny that doubles is worth £5.12. But obviously, if you'd have 50 grand a day, you'd have £500,000. After 20 days, the penny still is only worth £5,242, and your 50 grand a day is earn you £1 million. But, and I actually can't see these numbers now because I've got the pictures on the side. But you can see, click through again, that actually after 30 days, that penny is worth £5.4 million, whereas the 50,000 each day is worth 1.5 million. Now, obviously, this is an extreme example, but it's really showing the power of compounding of that penny that's growing. So to give a real life example, so if you invested £1 in 1989, because of compounding, it would be worth £253 30 years later. So time really is the magic when it comes to investing. Now, another factor to be aware of is inflation. Effectively, that over time, the cost of things that we want to buy increases. So £10,000 in 1999 in today's money would only be worth £6,626. So effectively, your money buys you less over time. So if you are saving, it's important to make sure that the interest rate that you're getting exceeds inflation, because otherwise that savings part is effectively getting smaller over time. And that's obviously a big challenge for us at the moment because interest rates are at historic lows. So it's tricky. So what else can be done with our savings? So equities or shares are investments in companies that are listed on the stock exchange. Obviously, the values of shares can vary massively depending on how the market perceives a company's performance or how they think it's likely to perform in the future. And what this means is that the value of investments and of shares can go up and down quite quickly. And this is what we call volatility. Now, historically, equities have outperformed all other asset classes over the long term. So it is what we would recommend to clients for longer term. Obviously, what's happened in the past is not a guarantee of what's going to happen in the future. But if you look back over the last 100 years, it is clear that there is a reward for people who are willing to take some risk and invest in shares rather than keeping their money in cash and in government bonds. Obviously, you have to remember that there is always risk and reward, and that's different for every person. We all have different attitudes to risk in life, and that will also affect what sort of attitude we might have to investing as well. So what could potentially be a balanced view of this? So if we think back to, say, Sophie, so she's saving into a cash ISA. Let's say she becomes aware that her interest rate is not really very attractive, and she becomes aware that because of inflation, she's missing out, or her money is effectively not growing over time. So how might someone like Sophie start their investment journey? You can see here the example that actually what Sophie decides to do is to open a stocks and shares ISA and actually split her monthly contribution between this and her cash ISA. So she's not doing anything crazy here. We're not talking about going and putting all our money on black, but actually it's just having a think about what is our current attitude to risk, and is that going to work for our long and medium term goals? What small changes could we make that might mean that we can actually achieve those goals? And the key thing to point out is that whilst, yes, it's correct that Sophie should think about diversifying how she's saving, it's also really important that she doesn't do anything that she's not comfortable with. So it's really important that we only ever do what we're comfortable with when it comes to risk and investments. And that'll be different for you and your friends as well. So when we're having conversations, don't let other people's attitudes make you feel that you need to do things that same way. Investing is very, very personal to us. Okay. So we've looked at timescales and goals and how investing differs from saving. So, really have a think. Do you think that you should be saving or investing, a combination of the two? What sits right for you? And what will allow you to go to sleep at night without having any worries? That's important as well. Okay. Now, many of us struggle when it comes to looking long term. So let's focus on that for a second. I think one of the biggest mistakes we all make in life in general is just getting caught up in the day-to-day running of things. And actually, we don't take time to stop and take stock of where we're up to. And it's the same with our finances. Do we ever take that step back and stop and look ahead? So where would you like to be in 5, 10, 20 years' time? Where do you see yourself and what would you like to be doing? And importantly, do you know how much that's going to cost? So this is especially important when it comes to retirement. Let me give you a little guide in terms of how much it might cost. So this is the pension income that a single person would need, assuming that they get a full state pension. So depending on whether we'd like to eat out, the types of holidays we'd like, trips to the theatre, etc., all those extra luxuries, all affects the size of pension that we need and that we're working towards. And the big question is, do you know what your number is? So in our business, we call this your financial freedom number. Now, a good rule of thumb is to work out what level of income you think you'll need for your retirement, and then multiply that by 25. And that will give you an idea of the total pension pot that you need to be saving towards. Obviously, in the UK, we're very fortunate we have the state pension, so that can contribute towards that total number. So don't forget to deduct that because it does make a big difference. And obviously, we've talked about compounding. So the sooner that we can start putting money towards our retirement, and the sooner that compounding can be working for us and helping us as well. So think about what we want our retirement to look like. Do we think we're saving enough to fund what we're working towards? And if you are working, then definitely go and speak to your employer and find out about your current workplace pension and see whether you've got the option of putting any extra into that as well. Okay, so that is my whistle-stop tour. I've put a couple of reminders there just in terms of key takeaways. So just to make sure that we've set ourselves short, medium and long-term goals. Think about whether you've got the opportunity to save any money from your current budget, and to make sure that you are budgeting those savings so that they're definitely not just sitting in your current account and tempting you to spend them. And then making sure that we're trying to use those savings that we can make effectively, potentially looking to invest them or get better returns to help us hit our goals. So I don't know whether anybody has got any questions. Thanks, Tam, for putting that in the chat. I'm conscious that is quite a lot of info to take in.
Yeah, I think it was really good. Thank you so much. I think it's nice, like you said, sometimes it's just starting the conversation on those kind of topics, isn't it? Because we don't, depends on where you are in life, but most of us don't necessarily think about our retirement or what that plan might look like on a day-to-day basis. So sometimes it's nice to go, actually, do you know what? I do need to have that in the back of my mind. And whilst you might think, I want to buy a house, but you think, oh, I don't even know where to start getting on the property ladder. So it's nice to kind of have it, just broken down like that so you can see.
Yeah, and I think obviously with the furlough community, there's a variety of age ranges, so people will be at different stages of their financial journey. So I just tried to include a couple of snippets that might be relevant for different people on different pathways. But yeah, I'm happy if anyone has, I've put my email address at the bottom there. If anyone does have anything they want to ask separately, one of the things I find running these sessions is that often I get lots of emails and questions afterwards, but people just aren't necessarily too comfortable sharing during the session. So yeah, if anyone has got any questions, then please feel free to drop me an email. Or Tam, I think there was a link that you were going to share as well.
Yeah.
Wanted to afterwards.
Yeah, I've just had a question messaged to me privately, which I can read out if that's okay with you, Michelle.
Yeah, of course.
So someone has said, is there a kind of a cutoff age where it would be too late to be a first-time buyer? Obviously, sometimes it's better to be as young as possible, but that's not the reality for a lot of people in the current climate. So would you say there is kind of an age where if you haven't already bought, it's almost too late?
No, I think if you are later, the only real constraints is that often mortgage companies will cap the point at which they will allow you to have a mortgage passed. So generally that can be like, they're all a little bit different, but when you sort of get to 70, so if you're say a 50-year-old looking to take out a mortgage, most mortgage providers might cap you at a 20-year mortgage. So that could affect what your monthly repayments are. But it really is a personal thing. And if you are later in life, but actually still really want to buy your first home and that's a priority for you, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. So yeah, it's a personal thing, and it would depend on what someone's sort of goals were really.
Oh, thank you. I hope that helps to the person that sent that to me. Then I've got another one then. So are there any useful tools or apps to help you set sensible budgets? I find it quite hard work going through bank statements, etc., and putting it all together. Is there anything that can make it easier each month?
Sure. So depending on what devices you use, like Microsoft Excel, if you've got access to Excel, actually has some really great templates. I know it sounds simple, but the templates they've got there really can sort of guide you in terms of how to break down what your expenses are. Or if you're an Apple user on your phone, it can be handy because if you've got Numbers, the Numbers app, they also have got some pre-set up budgets. And it's always handy having it on your phone. I think that would be a key tip because you've always got it with you. Whereas if you're reliant on the end of the month, then having to go and do it on a spreadsheet, then yeah, it becomes really tedious going through bank statements. I can relate to that personally as well. So yeah, just using some of the generic budgeting apps that Apple and Excel have already got, I would say are helpful. And I'm happy to share the links to some of those if people would like them.
Brilliant, thank you. Someone's also then messaged me privately and said, for a first-time buyer, would you recommend going to your bank and speaking to them as a starting point, or would you recommend like a private mortgage broker?
It depends. I would probably say to do both. If you, depending on what your sort of current credit position is, your bank will have visibility of your spending habits and those sorts of things. So if you have limited evidence of your credit worthiness, sometimes banks are able to offer you a preferential rate because of that. But generally, I would say mortgage brokers are helpful both because they understand the criteria that lots of different lenders have, so they can guide you towards what suits you better. And also they, as a first-time buyer, they are then really helpful at talking you through the process, and they're really not that expensive. So I would say speak to your bank in case they can offer you something special that your mortgage broker can't access, but otherwise I would say to do it through a mortgage broker.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I've then had another one sent. I think obviously the mortgage and rent thing is obviously a very
Sure.
thick at the moment. There's another one saying that they're employed but they were furloughed over lockdown. Will that affect their borrowing for a mortgage? I don't know whether the person was paid or not, or what their furlough looked like, but how does that and the difference, I guess, in what people may have earned compared to what they normally would earn in lockdown, would that affect you if you then went to try and get a mortgage?
Is a specific question that I don't know specific answer to. I can give you what my expectation would be, and that is that generally the banks are looking just for evidence of what your existing salary is. So I think if you were on furlough but not back working, they might be asking more questions. But I think if you are back working now and can evidence that, then generally they're just looking at the last 3 months payslip. So it might affect in terms of the total amount that they would lend to you, but it definitely wouldn't mean that you wouldn't be able to borrow.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that's something I've got.
I do, yeah. If people are, I do have a little brochure that we sometimes use with clients that is like a guide for first-time buyers. So perhaps it would be, I'm not sure what the best way to share things is, Tam, with people, but that's something that I'm happy to share with people, if that would be helpful as well. So maybe I know people have put their email addresses in for the workbook, but I can include a first-time buyer's guide as well if people think that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So if anybody, I've had a couple of emails sent to me, and I think you've had a couple sent to you, Michelle. Yeah, so if anyone else would like the information, either of the documents, like I said, either drop your email on the chat now or just send it to me on the Frollo app. It's absolutely fine, and we will get those over to you. Equally, what Michelle mentioned just before, so I've got a link that I will share probably on the meetup on Frollo itself, so I'll put it in like a comment so it will flag up in all of your notifications. We've got a link that Michelle has really kindly shared with us, so you can book into a session with her, kind of have like a free half an hour, and you can talk through if there's a particular topic, particular issue that you might need some help with, and then kind of work out next steps from there. So if there's something that actually you do want to ask about but not on a public forum like this, that might be something that's really useful. And like I said, I'll put that in the comments of the meetup on the app so everyone can access that if they wish. I think that is all the questions we've got on here at the moment, unless anyone's got any kind of last ones they want to ask. I've got another email just been sent to me, so thank you very much. I'll get that one added. But yeah, thank you so much for this evening, Michelle. I think it's been really insightful, really nice. And it's just, no, you're more than welcome. It's one of those things that it's starting the conversation. It's a huge topic.
There's such a big taboo, isn't there, with money? And what it means is that often when we need help, we don't really have anybody to talk to about it. So I'm all about trying to break that barrier and give people more confidence when it comes to dealing with their money. So hopefully it's helped a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely has. I found it really helpful, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. So thank you so much for joining us, guys. Thank you for giving up your evening. And like I said, all the links, everything I will pop on to the app, but just drop me a message if there's anything that you need.